going to be reading chapter 3 from the biggest story, how the snake crusher brings us back to the garden. If you remember in chapter 1, God made everything, including Adam and Eve. But Adam and Eve didn't listen to God's voice, and because they sinned by disobeying him, they had to leave the garden that he made for them. In chapter 2, we see that people continued to disobey God and not listen to him. So he punished all of the world by sending a flood, saving only Noah and his family to start over again. So now in chapter 3, we see what happens next with the children of Noah. Chapter 3. Look at that. Cool stuff. All right, can you see with me? I think you can. Not too long after the whole tower business, God called a man named Abraham to leave his home and go to a new country. Actually, his name was Abram at this point, but everyone remembers him as Abraham. When God called Abraham, he made a lot of big promises. He promised to bless Abraham and to bless everyone who blessed Abraham. He promised to curse everyone who cursed Abraham. He promised Abraham a land and a child. God promised that Abraham would be the father of a great nation and that all nations would be blessed through him. Pretty much all the blessings that God wanted to give Adam and Eve, he promised to Abraham. And the best part, this time God was going to do everything himself to make sure Abraham got his blessing. Whoa. You might think that God wanted to bless Abraham because he was such a swell guy. But Abraham didn't know God at all when God called him. And even after he got the call and all these promises, Abraham could still be a liar and a bit of a scaredy cat. Abraham's life had a lot of ups and downs, but he had two things going for him. The only two things, it turns out, that really matter. God's promises to bless him and Abraham's belief in God's promises. That's all Abraham had, which was a good deal because it was all he needed. Did you hear those two things? The only two things Abraham had and the only two things he really needed was that God had made promises to him and that Abraham believed God's promises. At times, it looked as if God wasn't going to keep his promise to Abraham. For one thing, it was about 100 years before Abraham and his wife Sarah, who used to be called Sarai, had a baby named Isaac, who thankfully was also called Isaac. And then when the baby grew into a boy, God told Abraham to kill him. That must have seemed like a not-so-funny way to make a great nation out of Abraham, but Abraham listened to God anyway. And at the last second, God gave Abraham a ram to sacrifice instead of his beloved son. It was God's way of saying, I'll take care of the rescuing. Just trust me. See Abraham with his son Isaac. And you see the ram that God provided so that Isaac would be spared and they would sacrifice a ram instead. Eventually, Isaac grew up and got married and had some kids of his own. Twins to be exact, Esau and Jacob. These guys. Which one do you think is Esau? Which one do you think is Jacob? Look really carefully. There might be a hint in the picture. God picked Jacob to get the blessing, even though he was the younger brother and wasn't supposed to get the blessing. But God is God, so he gets to pick. Jacob had 12 sons, and this time it was the fourth son, Judah, who wound up with the best blessing. Jacob told Judah that a lion of a leader would come from his family. Look at all the sons. You see them? Which one do you think was Judah? Again, there's probably a hint in the picture. Great blessings, but not so great people. Isaac was sort of a weakling. Jacob was a selfish trickster, and Judah did such dumb stuff, we don't even want to talk about it. And yet again and again, God kept his promises all the same. He blessed the whole lot of them despite themselves. Maybe the snake crusher would still come from the gnarled branches of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob family tree. And then chapter 4 will be next time. Think about that. God made all these promises to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, and God kept all of his promises to them. Can you think of some of the promises God's made to you and to your family in the Bible? Maybe ask your mom or dad about those and talk about them together. Thank you for joining me. Love you, miss you, and Lord willing, we'll read the next chapter together soon. Bye.